Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from the Frontier, and thank you for stopping by. I'll be away tomorrow, so there'll be no podcast. I'm looking forward to being in Johannesburg, and this is a photograph of the sunset taken from the hotel in which I stayed last time, and I will be staying this time again. And it was a glorious sunset and a lovely place, very interesting hotel. On a Friday night to really see a white African tribe in action, the Afrikaner tribe, and I'm looking forward to just spending my evening there and immersing myself in that. Actually, we're doing a lot of other things which I'll tell you about, but looking forward to being there. Thoroughly enjoyed attending the Samsung Note 4 launch today at the Serena Hotel. They do put on a good show. I'll put up a photograph of myself, Samsung Vice President Robert Ngeru, and Manoj Changarampat, who's the Internet and Mobile Marketing Director and a friend. He did Mindspeak earlier in the year. I'll also put up a photograph of this wide selfie that they've managed to do in the Note. It really looks pretty swanky. And finally a photograph of myself and Lisa, who's the marketing manager. And Charles Obo has written a very interesting piece, and I thank Charles for the shout out. The piece is called "A New Type of Digital Child is Here and Every Parent Should Have One." And let me read bits of it. 23-year-old American Chris Sanchez is the kind of child every modern parent would wish to have. Like all young people his age, he spends a lot of time on social media, Twitter in particular. But he is not sharing selfies, gossip, or leaked photos of a naked Rihanna or a shirtless Cristiano Ronaldo. Instead, according to a recent article by Fast Company, Sanchez works hard doing research and tweets about 60 to 70 facts, some serious, some fun, under his Twitter handle UberFacts. Follow him, actually, it's very interesting. He tweets things like 1 in 20 people do not have the biological father they think they have. Or more bank robberies happen on Fridays than any other day, and the most popular time for banks to be robbed is between 9 a.m. and 11 a.m. This young man earned $500,000 last year. 7.4 million followers on Twitter, page so popular that companies pay him to post links about their products and services, and that is where the money comes from. The world has really changed. Can you imagine your child in his pajamas lying in bed with a laptop or a Note 4? Because that was very much a blogger, photographer, curator's dream. Not even having had a shower, making more in a year than you, who wears your sharp suit or business skirt and white or blue blouse and goes out in the maddening traffic every day to labor in some office. There are parents out there who are happy that their grown son is not getting out of bed to hit the streets to look for a job. The future is here. So we looked around at Kenyan Twitterdom to see how things looked and who could make some decent change or really help give wings to a cause if they chose to tweet about it. Media companies, journalists, presenters, not surprisingly, have cornered the Kenyan Twitter market. To pick a few, KTN has 650,000 followers, NTV 594,000, Citizen TV 587,000. When it comes to Twitter handles of newspaper titles, Daily Nation leads the pack with 485,000 followers. The Standard follows with 314,000. This means that when one of these days the migration toward digital platforms comes of age and media companies get smart at figuring out how to make hay out of their social media footprints, they will not need to pay a penny to marketing firms to help them with their campaigns and promotions. But the really intriguing bit is that there are now individuals in Kenya who have a larger Twitter following than media companies that are older than 100 years. For example, Jeff Koinange, who's a friend, does his thing on KTN with 415,000 followers. NTV's Larry Madoa with 373,000. Citizen's Julie Gichuru with 367,000. All have larger followers than the Standard with 314,000. Who knows, if Koinange continues interviewing more controversial and colourful characters that come to his set, looking like peacocks, he could surpass Daily Nation on Twitter in a year. I sense there is a major power shift underway here. Exclude non-Kenyans based in Kenya, such as Safaricom CEO Bob Collymore, who has 322,000 followers. Throw in more random Twitter heavies in the basket: columnist, blogger, and financial advisor Ali Sachu, 114,000 followers, and controversial blogger Robert Alai has 137,000. If social media becomes a truly mind-shifting platform in Kenya, I believe it already is, and everyone who has attended Sunny Bindra's social media summits at Strathmore Business School probably believes that it already is, then very soon folks might be making some interesting choices. Jeff Koinange's following on Twitter is nearly twice the combined circulation of all the daily newspapers published in a day in Nairobi. Assume people are paying as much attention to social media as to the papers, and you're an advertiser with a budget of $2 million to run a campaign in all the newspapers, but you can also pay Koinange $500,000 and reach twice the number of people. What will you do? Also, if you have a small business and no advertising budget, now you have a prayer. All you need to do is be nice to Sachu, Alai, Gichuru, and Koinange, and they can drop in a good word for your product in their tweets on a slow day, and voila, you're in the money. For now, though, it would more than suffice to have a Twitter smart son called Sanchez. Home thoughts, of course. It's Nishat's birthday. I wish her a wonderful birthday and thank her for all the years she's put up with me. But of course my mind has been on my youngest daughter, and I remembered the photograph I took of her waiting in the waiting room at Lewa as we waited for the plane to collect us and take us to Nairobi. And on that note, I'll put a photograph of 2 male rhinos being decimated in Africa. Jump to Paul Virilio: images contaminate us like viruses. Him again: the speed of light does not merely transform the world, it becomes the world. Globalization is the speed of light. And this, which I'll leave you to think about: we now have the aesthetics of the disappearance of a numerical, unstable image of fleeting nature whose persistence is exclusively retinal. Think about that. Political reflections: China may risk region instability. This is the Indonesian army chief. China must not use its great force to create regional instability. Indonesian military chief General Muldoko said, as his nation seeks to avoid being drawn into China's territorial disputes in the South China Sea. China is a great economic power, however, we don't want this great force to create instability in the region, he said. Just a small disturbance within this maritime zone will give a big impact and create turbulence in the region. My conclusions are that Indonesia is in sync with the pivot. ISIS in Syria: general reveals the lack of communication with the US and his country's awkward relationship with their allies by default. This is Robert Fisk. The leading Syrian army officer, who requested anonymity, takes a shrewd view of events in history and clearly had no objection to America's airstrikes on ISIS targets in his country, although he viewed them dispassionately. Our army doesn't know where or when these strikes are going to happen, he said. We see aircraft on our radar, we can see everything. But if our checkpoints on the front see the strikes, it is only by chance. We and the Americans are not sharing information with each other. The Americans just do it. It's natural. They decide in the UN that they are going to do these strikes. Syria says yes, we are fighting Daesh and the other terrorist groups, but America never asked us about their targets. I'm going to put up a photograph of a Norwegian F-16 shadowing a Russian Air Force Tupolev 2 Tu-95 in a photograph released by the Norwegian Air Force. NATO aircraft have been scrambled to shadow Russian strategic bombers over the Atlantic and Black Sea and fighter planes over the Baltic in what the Western Alliance called an unusual burst of activity as tensions remain elevated because of the situation in Ukraine. In all, NATO said its jets intercepted 4 groups of Russian aircraft in about 24 hours since Tuesday, and some were still on maneuvers late on Wednesday afternoon. I referred to this when I said NATO has thrown out a whole new characterization of warfare called ambiguous warfare. And I borrowed that phrase that was used about Ebola shadow zones and said eastern Ukraine has become a shadow zone. The CDC put out a new poster about Ebola, and the link is on the website, where they say that droplet spread happens when germs traveling inside droplets that are coughed or sneezed from a sick person enter the eyes, nose or mouth of another person. Droplets travel short distances, less than 3 feet. And a person might also get infected by touching a surface or object that has germs on it and then touching their mouth or nose. I wrote severally about this, but on the 20th of October, I wrote about the escape velocity of Ebola, saying that, many people dismiss concerns by comparing the optics of influenza numbers versus the Ebola numbers and dismiss Ebola as just a blip on the global radar. I've recently discovered an outstanding contemporary and intellectual thinker called Paul Virilio, who said the following about electronic money. The effectiveness of electronic money lies in its mass, which increases its velocity of circulation. Virilio claims that as the last post-industrial resource, acceleration exceeds accumulation. The escape of velocity becomes the equivalent of profit. Believes that acceleration and speed are the defining characteristics of our new world. So my first point about the Ebola virus is that it is not about the absolute number of cases, it is about its escape velocity. Viruses exhibit non-linear and exponential characteristics. And I was talking about WHO's predictions, and I was saying my point is that we have not entered the parabolic phase yet, when the escape velocity is at its fastest, and therefore the comparison with malaria and influenza might be an irrelevant comparison. Then I was talking about the invisible caseload of Ebola cases which are not being captured by the surveillance system, shadow zones. We have not received any data since late September around the Ebola different mutation, admittedly in DR Congo. A friend in the DRC informed me that deaths from Ebola in the DRC were about 500. Last numbers we saw from WHO late September were about 30. Saying that researchers have identified more than 300 new viral mutations in the latest strain of Ebola. It is a numbers game. The more cases you have, the more likely there are going to be mutations that could change the virus in a significant way. This is David Sanders, Professor of Biological Sciences. The more it persists, the more likely we're going to be thrown a curve. The curve Sanders is speaking about is that Ebola, contrary to this CDC protocol, is in fact airborne. And now we've learned from this PDF to which I referred, they're not calling it airborne, they're talking about droplets, which surely are airborne. And so I was talking about, can it mutate into something that's fully airborne? And I call that the tail risk. And I was speaking about the non-linear exponential rate of mutation of the virus gives the tail risk a real bite. I'll put up an image of Ebola. Currency markets, we had plenty of movement. Euro down to 125.88, dollar index up to 86.23, Japanese yen down 109.12, Aussie 0.8768, Indian rupee 61.43, South Korean won 10.53.94, Real 246.14, and they hiked rates and probably caught everyone off guard. They hiked rates a quarter point. The Bovespa fell 2.5%. Didn't like that news. Egyptian pound is around that 7.15 level. South African rand is weakened but stayed below 11 at 10.9685. Bloomberg is reporting that the dollar jumped as Fed ends its bond buying. The dollar climbed to a 4-week high. Bloomberg spot index gained 0.2%. South Koreans won, led emerging market currencies lower. Gold dropped. I'll put up a 3-month chart of the dollar index, and I see it much higher over the next 12 months. And I've been saying this for a while now. Last time I wrote about it was on the 29th of September, when I said there's a small window for sharks as dollar rises. I said, on August 25, I'd written, you see, in the old days, these conditions would have created a flight into the dollar. If things tip big, the dollar might soar. At this time last year, the US was printing $85 billion a month under its QE program. I used the example of Scott Fitzgerald, Great Gatsby, in his blue gardens, Men and girls came and went like moths among the whisperings and the champagne and the stars. I said the punch bowl just kept on giving. Well, next month now the entire QE program gets wrapped up, and I said the markets are going to have to wrestle with some serious hangover effects. I mentioned Stanley Druckenmiller, his famous quote, which is, "As a macro investor, my job for 30 years was to anticipate changes in the economic trends that were not expected by others and therefore not yet reflected in securities prices." And I was saying the last time I felt the blood soar, felt it soar in my blood about this was in the crude oil markets when George Bush got up on the USS Abraham Lincoln and said, "Mission accomplished," the oil price collapsed for about 24 hours. And I'm saying the point I'm making is that the dollar has just started getting going. There will be blood in the water. There is a small window if we want to be the sharks. And on that note, I'll put up a photograph of the shark that I took in Dubai Mall. And I'll also put up another image of visitors looking at jellyfish in a tank at Kamo Aquarium in Japan. Euro dollar softer below 126 at 125.88. I'll put up a 3-month chart. Gold coming back towards the 1200 level. I'll put up a 6-month chart. I expect fresh 2014 lows before the year end. Crude oil, $81.89 on NYMEX. I think it's going to break down again. I'll put up a 5-day chart, then a 6-month chart. The reasons why I think it's going to break down again is because of the reasons I put in that piece, Who Kneecapped Oil. And I described the US administration as Norman Bates in the film Psycho. They've sliced up oil real good and are using it as a geopolitical spear. And I said it is the US that is the new price setter for the oil markets, and this is a deep and important geopolitical development. The new price levels will have immediate and enormous geopolitical and financial knock-on effects. My point is that Obama has taken control of the crude oil cockpit. He is in charge of the aeroplane. He has control of all the instruments, and it has been a wild ride for the last few weeks, which could get a whole lot wilder. Michael Satter, another one, bites the dust. This is the Daily Maverick. Michael Satter has died before several times. In fact, rumors of his death have swept through this vast country, only for Satter himself to put in a public appearance and confirm that all was well. "I am not dead," he remarked wryly in September as he reopened the Zambian parliament. But if he wasn't dead, then he was certainly sick. There was a strange pallor, uneasy gait, hesitant speech, so unlike the firebrand politician who had spent so much of his career railing against the government and famously the Chinese. Unexplained medical holidays to Israel, missed public appearances, most recently his absence from Zambia's independence celebrations and the speech he failed to deliver at the UN General Assembly. There were rumors, mostly spread by independent media, who were rapped on the knuckles for reporting lies and distortions, for misleading the nation about the state of the president's health. Except these rumors were right. President Satter really was sick and he was seeking medical attention abroad. But even those fancy foreign doctors couldn't save him, and on Tuesday evening he died, for real this time, at a hospital in London, aged 77, with his wife and 3 of his sons at his side. Satter is the latest entry in a long line of African presidents to die in office, as the Daily Maverick has explored before. A combination of old age, poor health services, and a desire to hold on to power for far too long means that far too many sitting presidents have graduated to the great presidential palace in the sky in recent years. And then talking about Guy Scott, Satter's veteran right-hand man, who South Africans remember for his uncompromising criticism of the regional superpower. But politically, he's a tough sell. Scott is white. In some other African countries, the idea of a white vice president would be anathema. This isn't a problem in Zambia. I think that's great credit to them. But I think it would be a tremendous choice to put him in there. And saying that power vacuum creates uncertainty and the potential for instability. And saying that Satter's Patriotic Front could get punished in the polls for the fact that they lied and obfuscated on the subject of his health. I'm not sure whether that will happen. Vice President Guy Scott is now the acting leader. saying there is a bit of fight in the Patriotic Front to see who's going to be the candidate, and there's a lot of jockeying and positioning, which is true. Kwacha was down 1.1% yesterday, lower since August 15. Yields on Eurobonds rose just 1 basis point. Zambian Vice President Guy Scott has been named acting leader. Presidential elections to choose a permanent successor will be held within 90 days, apparently. Scott becomes Africa's first white head of state since F.W. de Klerk in apartheid South Africa. Samir Solani, who I follow on Twitter, tweeted a photograph of protesters in Burkina Faso knocking down a statue of President Compaoré, who wants term limits scrapped so he can contest again. Maplecroft are citing Bangladesh, Sierra Leone, South Sudan, Nigeria, Chad is facing the highest climate change risks, and saying climate change and lack of food security multiply risks of conflict and civil unrest in 32 countries. Maplecroft is very interesting, and they put out good research. Bloomberg is reporting that Mugabe said, "I know that some are saying Mugabe is old, let him go. I will not go anywhere," he said. "There's nowhere I'm going and my time is not up." We have people in the party fighting for positions, trying to push each other out, Mugabe said at a party meeting after opening parliament in Harare, the capital. "I can assure you that we're not going to have this nonsense of senior party members fighting each other for positions. Neither Mujuru nor Justice Minister Mnangagwa, both vying for Mugabe's position according to analysts, were present when Mugabe spoke." Dollar Rand last trading at 10.9603. I expect that to move back through 11. Interesting report about Ghana talking about 14-hour blackouts threatening the economy's growth. Cosmetics company owner says it's turned down a deal to ship a products to the US because of Ghana's power supply is too erratic. Of course, the SEDI, Africa's worst performer against the dollar this year, but it's gained 21% after retreating to a record low of 3.8876 on August the 21st. Producer prices also coming off the recent highs as well. South Sudan rebels say they've seized the oil hub in Bentu. The government is denying this. Kenya shilling is trading at 89.40, which is resilient in the context of a very strong dollar globally. Equity markets here in Nairobi have been on a losing streak since striking multi-year highs in late September. The all-share closed a record on the 23rd of September and then retreated 4.202% through yesterday morning. NAC 20 closed more than a 6-year high September 22nd before retreating 207.5 points September 22nd through this morning. African equity indices have encountered a downdraft in October, and in fact Nairobi has outperformed South Africa and Nigeria in this period. Going through the market, Safaricom turned 0.413% higher. It's at the bottom of its trading range. They're releasing first half results on 4th November. I expect a rally through that date. Business Week was carrying an article about how cheap oil is lifting all airlines, which probably informs us of why Kenya Airways has been firmer of late. American Airlines has rallied 43.2% since the 13th of this month, as an example. Sentiment rallied big on yesterday, 8.33%. It's up 96.96% this year. A lot of activity in the banks, people looking to buy this pullback. KCB was heavily traded, closed unchanged at 54.50, but this is again is the lower end of its range, expected to rally from here. Britam rallied sharply, 7.339%. An interesting story is Standard Chartered, where the main company shares are at multi-year lows, May 2009 lows. Here the market sort of got infected a little bit. It's probably a buying opportunity in my view. EABL closed at 275. KenGen been on a losing streak since it reported full year earnings. It's down 19.23% since that release on the 23rd of October. By comparison, KPLC has rallied 13% over that period. Once again, thank you for stopping by. I will be in South Africa tomorrow, so you will have kindly excused. And I really do appreciate the fact that you do take time to come and stop by.